Alex Merced. You're listening to this on my Twitter account, Libertarian. And essentially, like, I chose that particular handle for this Twitter account for a particular reason, because I do believe that, um, you know, the old adage, all you need is love. Like, love goes a long way, but we're going to get to that. Like, what I want to talk about today is those who know me, those who followed me or are aware of things I have to say. Generally, my mantra is be good to people. Okay, there's a lot to be gained in enhancing your rights, enhancing the quality of your life, overall, and just general overall happiness by just being good, kind, tolerant, forgiveness. But I'm also an avid libertarian, constantly advocating for consent, nonviolence, property rights, things like this. And I think because I advocate sort of for both categories of things, um, people get hung up on the conflation. They're like, well, you know, libertarianism is X, in the sense that, like, it is in its most sort of strictest, simple. Some people refer to it as like thin definition. Libertarianism is just sort of the belief that one person, no one basically has a right to the property of another. And then that could also be framed as basically every all social and professional interactions between individuals should be done on the basis of consent. It could be done that basically all arrangements in society should be voluntary, because that stems from the idea that, like, hey, if your property is your property and my property is my property, the only way to coordinate our individual property, which includes our body, our life, and all our sort of justly acquired things that we've earned through consent, the only way to exchange those things is through consent, through voluntarism, through sort of that individual freedom. Okay, so essentially, like, that at its core is what libertarianism is. Just basically taking that sort of like insight that the basic sort of fundamental sort of like, when have you sort of crossed that line, is when you start basically like using violence to damage or acquire or destroy the property of another. So if you destroy somebody else's life, liberty, and property, that's essentially at its core like the fundamental philosophical underpinnings of libertarianism. And then basically, as soon as you branch out from that, everyone starts debating 1,000 different things. Okay. So I'm not claiming that at its core libertarianism is about any particular like social virtue, like kindness, like tolerance, like whatnot. What I do argue, though, is that if you want a world where people do respect things like property rights, things where people respect things like consent, and basically more and more, if not all, our interactions are done in sort of a voluntary, consensual way, that does require a certain amount of general goodwill. This would say, like, there has to be at least a plurality of the population that generally is able to coexist with each other. Okay. um, because imagine the opposite. Imagine you have a society that, at least as is, starts at this point where no one is enacting any kind of violence to each other, but everybody hates each other, everybody dislikes each other, everybody doesn't trust each other. Okay, though that distrust, that hate, will eventually lead to a desire to coerce, which will lead to a desire to control, which generally leads to the kind of things we don't want as libertarians, because oftentimes all those kind of things comes from the fact that people just have these deeply seated suspicions of other people. Okay, and then basically they don't trust them to be free, so they got to control them. Okay, oh, I don't trust the rich, so we got to hire 100,000 IRS collectors, or think of your 1,000 other versions of the same thing. So in that case, if you want to kind of avoid those inclinations, you generally would want the opposite momentum. You generally want people to, like, be trusting of each other. You want people to be okay with each other's making different decisions, to tolerate each other, in the sense that, not that they love everything that everyone does, but they're okay with just people doing their thing. You want forgiveness because people make mistakes. It's when people stop forgiving, okay, you start getting into this sort of obsession with punishment, which oftentimes again starts eroding, because then everyone's just focusing on punishing others, which again starts creating the sort of like cycle of resentment and hate and anger and frustration, and despair. So there's no secret why, like, I mean, I'm not a particularly religious person, but I did grow up as a Catholic, and these were all running themes in there. And there's a reason why, like, you do see this in a lot of types of belief systems, because oftentimes for, you know, the generally to avoid like despotism, you do want a society that generally like gives each other the benefit of the doubt. Okay, you want kindness because basically people are going to suffer less if we choose to help each other. You want tolerance because we can focus on our own lives if we're not busy minding other people's business. Um, okay, and then three, you want forgiveness so that way we can make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. Okay, and not necessarily think that one mistake is going to ruin our entire life. Okay, none of this is necessarily something that people are obligated to. Like you can be a libertarian and not be kind and not be tolerant and not be forgiving, but I do think you're missing a piece to constructing the culture that'll lead to more libertarian ends, in the sense of creating that world where basically we all kind of give each other a space to thrive and survive and live and just be the best society we can be. Because I mean that's the point. The point of a political ideology is to kind of create, or any kind of like belief system, is that you believe that, hey, in this realm you're going to end up with a better world on the other side, and you don't just believe something just to believe something. Okay, you generally believe that the alternative would be worse. So in the sense that I do believe that ideally, like any alternative to a world based in consent and sort of voluntary dealings is generally going to be worse than one that is. But again, the world that is doesn't exist in a vacuum, so there it does exist within sort of like the culture of the time. And I do believe the most important pieces of that culture is not any specific belief system, like any specific doctrines or doctrinaires. It's our ability to be willing to engage each other, uh, and accept that those engagements aren't always going to be perfect. So I guess the forgiveness and the tolerance, and to give each other the benefit of the doubt, the kindness. Okay, like those three things can really give the realm for like there to be free markets that is going to give us the free market pricing that's going to allow, free market interest rates that are going to allow us to create the knowledge for us to coordinate resources in the economy better. It's going to create the communities that are going to make that there won't necessarily be a demand for any kind of coercive coordinating of resources, because we're helping each other out, and those who are sort of fall between the cracks are getting support, because we are being kinder to each other. But that because you have to foster that culture. That just doesn't happen. And that's my big issue with sort of political culture these days, is that everyone, when it comes to politics has it's all about winning an election and getting 51% of a vote. And you can get that, and then you need money to get that 51% of the vote. So there's two things: if you define somebody else as the enemy and drive hate and anger and frustration towards them, it's really easy to get people to donate and give you money. Also, it's really easy to build to get. It's basically the politics game has become convince 51% of the population, or 51% of the voting base, to hate the other 49%. And this erodes at the culture you generally need for a freer world, because then it just becomes, because when you drive enough hate, then people just want to subjugate that 49%. That 51% wants to subjugate the 49%. Okay, and it doesn't matter what you think of where the battle side. Like, this is why I get concerned when people are like, you know don't necessarily, like, for example, like a lot of like the tenor of some libertarians or some so-called libertarians talking about like communists. Like, I agree, like generally, like the idea of government coercing and reallocating resources is a bad idea and has had horrible consequences. But oftentimes the rhetoric is not about, oh, this is a bad idea for these reasons. It's that people who believe in these ideas are bad people and we should do bad things to them. And that then you're getting into that sort of like driving hate towards people. And again, people's ideas can change. So then you're no longer trying to persuade. Okay, so you're just in that sort of dynamic where now you've gotten to the cycle of hate that just drives this desire to subjugate and gets us away from the sort of like these libertarian ideals. And this is why I drive so hard and I try to push so hard against sort of like the results of political culture, the results of, like, again, the hate, frustration, and anger that politics drives in order to drive people to the polls, in order to raise money and all that stuff. So yeah, I tell people to be nice to each other. That doesn't necessarily make people want to cough up a bunch of cash or rush to a poll, but I think it does more for getting us to a better world. And hopefully, this gives you a better perspective on sort of what my perspective is. Again, I'm not claiming that I am the 100% right. Like, my case, it's up to me to make my case, and hopefully I did. And hopefully you found it compelling or laid out in a way that makes sense. And again, even if you disagree with me, hopefully you would now have a better understanding where I'm coming from. So that way we can engage in a more deliberate, understanding way, and that's what's important. So that's what I wanted to share today, and I'll try to do more of these Twitter Spaces in the future to explain these kind of things. But if you thought what I had to say was interesting, do retweet this and share it with others, and have a great day and enjoy.